Here's the deal. We had national, it's all about national views on Tennessee today, is kind of the look. Jesse Simonton of On3, in case you don't know, On3 is the new Rivals 24/7. Jesse Simonton was on our show many years ago. He writes for On3 now, and he did a couple of rankings this week where he looked at the top 10 offensive lines in the country, top 10 defensive lines in the country. Tennessee was on both lists. I was surprised about the offensive line list. Let's start with defensive line. You've had people talking about Tennessee's defensive line being the best in the country. I think you had a coach that threw that out there, and I think he quickly tried to put that toothpaste back in the tube. I think he just slipped in saying it. But Ohio State number 1, Michigan number 2. You see the light orange there, the peach color, that's SEC teams. So you got Georgia, you got Ole Miss, and then you got Tennessee at number 9. So very quickly, 9th best defensive line in the country. Whoever wants it, you agree with that? Is it too high, too low? Should it be higher than that? They're the best defensive line in the SEC?
I think that's low. Honestly, I think that's low. I think Tennessee's defensive line's better than that. I think especially when you consider the depth that they have at defensive line. Also, some of the defensive, like Ole Miss's defensive line, I don't believe in a whole lot. I mean, you couldn't stop anyone last year. So some of the teams that are ahead of them, I think Tennessee has a better defensive line than they do. So I would probably put Tennessee in the top 5 or 6 right now.
Ole Miss got help from the transfer portal. Don't forget Walter Nolan.
The portal king.
Yeah, so I think that's about right. I mean, I think Tennessee, the talk of them having the best defensive line in the country, that seems a bit much to me. But they have a lot of depth, as Will said. So I think that's the big thing. Aside from James Pierce, does anyone in that group stand out? I think that's the key. Those other teams have some stars, I think, a lot of them. So, Tennessee, not a whole lot besides James Pierce in terms of star power, but they do have a lot of good players. So I think top 10's about right. And I don't know, 7, 8, you can quibble with those, but not in the range where I'd put them.
Yeah, I can't tell you what Oregon's defensive line looks like. But you said a couple weeks ago on our show, I forgot what my question was. I do that.
Overrated and underrated position.
Yeah, and you had them as possibly overrated for those very same reasons.
Yeah.
They got one good star, a lot of good players, but is it really the number 1 unit in the country that people are talking about? Yeah. All right, so we got one they're underrated, one that's about right. Josh, Jimmy, what do you think?
I would say about right. I would move Tennessee up before I'd move them down in that spot because Pierce is the one star in that group. He's a pretty talented star that we're going to get to. And a year ago, we didn't know Pierce was going to do what he ended up doing. Out of all these guys that we're talking about on Tennessee's defensive line, somebody else could jump and have a big season, just like it happened with any other team. But the depth, the seniority as well. They have a lot of old guys on the defensive line from a college standpoint, Jimmy. I think that makes them pretty strong. But I'd say about right, 3rd in the SEC, 9th overall.
I'd go a little higher, and in part because of what you said. The star power is with Pierce. But I think Amari Thomas is really good. Norman Lott's really good. Josephs, I think, has a chance to take a step. But it's the depth. I don't know, and I'll admit, I don't know the depth at Oregon and some of these other programs. But I can't imagine many teams in the country having better quality depth, not just depth.
Veteran depth,
yes.
Proven.
So given that, I would put them a little higher. I'd probably have them in around 5 or 6 like Will.
Okay, well, let's go to the list that sort of surprised me. I did not expect to see Tennessee listed on the top 10 offensive lines, and there you go. Now, you see, look at the SEC teams in that. LSU, Texas, Georgia, Alabama. Then you got Oklahoma State, Oregon. You got Missouri's offensive line, Miami. Then Tennessee and Ole Miss. But Tennessee, 9th best offensive line, 9th best defensive line. Now, Simonton did right. Part of this is the system, which, Jimmy, you've bashed on for a couple of years now, that the system helps that run game a little bit. Still, though, 9th? That seems high to me. I wouldn't do that.
Well, to be honest with you, I'd have them closer to 9th in the SEC than in the country.
Woo, yeah.
Where's the depth on? And I'll brag about the defensive line depth. Where's the depth on the offensive line? What if Cooper Mays gets hurt? Who's the backup center? You're still trying to identify one of your guard spots. I do think they have several quality players on the offensive line, but not enough depth, and you're going to have some injuries up front. I would not put them in the top 10. I wouldn't put them even close to the top 10.
My only question would be which teams in this day and age have depth at offensive line because and I'm not trying to argue with you. That's a legitimate question. You look at a team like LSU that had a 5-star sitting there who's now at Tennessee. How many great backups are still sitting at? I mean, you had guys at Alabama that sat there because Nick Saban's going to get me in the pros. Are they still going to sit there with Kalen DeBoer in the years going ahead? So I think your point's good. I don't see them being in the top 10, and I do question their depth. But I also have to ask, what's the depth like everywhere else for offensive line when that's so valuable in the portal?
That's true. One other quick point. Tennessee led the SEC in rushing yards.
Yeah.
And I think people don't even look at the offensive line. Oh, they led the league in rushing, must
It
have a
must
really good
be.
offensive line.
Very good point.
Look, I think that that's about right when everyone's healthy. Because part of when you're doing a list is you're presuming health, right? At that
Yeah,
point,
oh,
when you
you
look
have
at the
to, yeah.
players, I love what Tennessee has on the interior portion of the offensive line. There's a lot of games missed between their center and their right guard last year. I don't think they have a tackle that can play at this level yet since Darnell Wright's left. I think what we saw last year for the 2 tackles they have, they just weren't good enough. Now, the pace and the tempo of the offense means they probably don't have to do as much as some other tackles. But you bring in a guy from LSU that was going to start there. Let's see him be good first before we start presuming that he's going to be great, I think.
I think I think the ranking's a little too high, but I understand the reasoning, I guess, because you look at the right side of that line: Cooper Mays, Javonte Spraggins, John Campbell. A lot of starts with those 3 guys, and then on the other side, you got a former 5-star at left tackle. You don't know what you have at left guard. That's obviously the big position we're not sure about. This group has a lot of uncertainty there too. So with one starting spot being shaky and one being a first-time starter, hard for me to put them in the top 10. But to your point, John, how many teams out there were dying for offensive line help in the portal? It's a position where no one feels good about what they have, and I think that's part of that ranking.
I mean, you would know better than I, but quarterbacks get paid X. I would think tackles maybe number 2 or number 3.
Good
I mean,
tackles are up there,
They're
yeah.
way up there. So, Josh, your thoughts on the offensive line and being ranked in the top 10 in the country?
Yeah, depth is a big reason we would either hold steady or move the defensive line up. Well, then depth would be a reason I'd probably move the offensive line down. And I know that's for different reasons. You rotate on the defensive line. You hope to avoid injury on the offensive line, but you also probably have to expect injury at some point on the offensive line. So I'm not totally surprised, though, because I looked at the teams that were outside. Like, I didn't see one traditional Big Ten school. Oregon's the only one that's there, and we usually think offensive line Big Ten.
Michigan, Ohio State,
Wisconsin
yeah.
had a bunch of transfers out. Michigan's having to replace some guys. So I think Tennessee benefited from other schools' issues. That goes back to the point of how many schools do have legitimate depth, and that might be why Tennessee gets a boost. They at least have backups that are seniors like Dane Davis and Jackson Lampley, unproven as starters, but 5th, 6th-year guys compared to what other schools are trying to do too.
All right, I want to move on. There was one other list from On3. We don't have a graphic for you. I can just tell you. A few weeks ago, it's funny when you say something, the responses you get. But I said a couple of weeks ago, James Pierce, number 1 draft pick overall. I think that's going to be a quarterback. Is he top 5 capable? I guess he looks like a speed rusher to me. I mean, I need to see more. Maybe that's just me. But the response was, oh, yeah, trying to make sure he doesn't get drafted. I'm like, well, if that's the case, it sure didn't work with Joe Milton going to my Patriots. But the Pierce thing, I'm already on record as, seems a little high to me. Well, Nick Schultz of On3 put out a list of the top 100 players in college football. Yes, the number 1 college football player, offense, defense, across America, senior, junior, doesn't matter. Number 1 player in the country is James Pierce, as I break my finger. I mean, if the way it's going this offseason, by August they're just going to hand him the Heisman Trophy. I mean, I'm stunned that his name just keeps going up there. But okay, you guys tell me, number 1 player on the planet. James Pierce.
I get it, right? Because I think he has a combination of explosiveness and bend that you don't normally see, but he's got to gain 10 or 12 pounds to really be a top 5 pick in the pros, I think, from where he is right now. I think Quinshon Judkins is the best player in college football. But if you get on the rest of that list, we lost a lot of star power in college football last year, and
Not
there
saying
aren't
it's
that
not-
many returning stars.
You can put him in the mix.
with
Fine,
his
but gosh,
production. So if you look at it and you say Judkins underperformed last year, Carson Beck was really, really good, but I don't know who else I would put there. So especially when you look at the pass rush win rate that he had.
number 1 player in college football?
I'm not going there. I mean, he has that kind of talent. I understand the ranking
Yeah, could be at the
reasoning,
end of
so
the year,
maybe could be. I think this, like Will said, this is a reflection of the fact that there are no known stars in college football that you trust enough to put up. Quinn Ewers and guys like that, you're not putting them at number 1 right now. So I think it's more a reflection of that, not so much that he's that good.
I think it's a reflection of what we do in this business. And that is, we look at other lists to influence our list. Because Nick Schultz, no offense, you haven't watched every college football player in the country. So you're looking at the fact, the more people say this guy's incredible, the more people are going to say this guy's incredible. How do you know? Well, he's on every list, so I have to put him on my list. I think he's good, but number 1 in the country, Jimmy.
John, I have seen every college player.
There you go. And he is.
And he is not in the top. No, he's not number 1. No, I think he made one play last year that's elevated his stock tremendously. The
Iowa.
interception return against Iowa. And people look at that and say, look at that versatility. And that was a great play on his part. I give him that. But he also has to be consistent in that regard. He has to be a good run stopper.
Yeah.
I think he's a terrific pass rusher. I think he had 10 sacks last year, which was either close to being first in the SEC or tied for first, whatever. I don't think he's as good as Myles Garrett. That would be a guy I would compare to who was a number 1 pick
Yeah.
in the draft. So I think Pierce is a top 10 guy. I don't see him as number 1.
Josh.
Yeah, I would just reiterate multiple points. I think that James Pierce benefits from the mock drafts that have him as the number 1 player in next year's draft, so that kind of goes into your mind. And then there's no obvious quarterback.
Yeah.
If you have a Heisman Trophy winner coming back like a year ago, well, then you put that guy right there at number 1. There's no obvious quarterback. Carson Beck would feel like a reach. Number 2 is Luther Burden at Missouri.
Right.
That's arguable. Will Campbell, I think, is in the top 5 offensive tackle at LSU.
The top 5 are all from the SEC.
Yeah, and maybe Will Campbell is the best. That would feel like a reach. So I think it's a reach anywhere. Pierce is so athletically gifted.
Yeah.
The plays in the bowl game, draft stock, makes sense for why he's the choice out of all the other players considered.
He's going to have some serious expectations to live up to this fall. So that's why I'm tempering mine a little bit, because I'm Mr. Fair. Always have been. All right, first segment of our show brought to you by our friends at the Garza Law Firm. So many of the clients on this show who bring you this show every week are based right here in our area, and that sense of community is important both for this show and also just for across your daily lives. You want companies that are giving back to the community, chipping in, helping others. Well, that is the Garza Law Firm, I tell you. Marcos Garza is an East Tennessee native, and he and his team are the best attorneys you will find anywhere across all of East Tennessee. Start with them if you need an attorney. If you need somebody to help you with a problem you found yourself in, it's a great place to start. The Garza Law Firm. Find out more at garzalaw.com.